Welcome today to our design panel at Nantucket by Design. I'm Stacy Bucas. I'm one of the co-chairs with my cohort, Olivia Charney, sitting right there. And today we continue to explore the relevance and importance of legacy and design. We have luminaries in 4 different categories of design who will be chatting with Steele Marcoux, the editor-in-chief of Veranda. And I'd like to thank our sponsors for the luncheon. I don't want to forget anyone. Nantucket Looms, who did the lovely decor on the stage today. Blue Flag Partners and Stark. So thank you to them. And now I'd like to introduce Michael Harrison, the Chief Curator and Obed Macy Research Chair at the Nantucket Historical Association.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate everybody turning out today and coming, and we really appreciate the panelists' time. All of your participation really helps make the NHA's mission of preserving and communicating the history of Nantucket possible. And all of the events this week that are part of Nantucket by Design all aim to reinforce this message that we are here for the community of Nantucket and for all the people who visit Nantucket to help explain sort of why this island is the way it is and how it might be different today from how it was in the past. And with that in mind, I just want to take half a second and get us all to cast our minds back and think a little bit about the context of design on Nantucket. We're all super familiar with the idea that the island used to be a whaling port, and it used to be dominated by the Quaker religion. And if you think about the needs of design in a community that's sending ships off across the world and then is meeting in silence every Sunday to worship together, really what we end up with is fairly simple and utilitarian designs. Efficient wooden and brick factories, houses that make use of materials that have to be shipped across the water from the mainland because there's almost nothing here you can build your house out of. Household goods that are very straightforward and simple and useful and not showy. Textile designs that are led from the mainland, from the tastemakers in Boston and New York and Philadelphia. But if you move forward and we get out of the whaling period and you get into this becoming a summer resort with, in the initial period, large hotels on the shore, many of which aren't here anymore, and new houses on the cliff built in a contemporary style, this becoming a place of relaxation really brings a whole new need for design here, and we start seeing landscape architects show up to design beautiful gardens that take advantage of the breezes and of the plants that can thrive here. And you start seeing new needs for architecture and livable spaces. And then in the 20th century, starting in the 1920s, but really taking off in the 1950s, there's a lot of development on Nantucket. There's a lot of house building out in places of the island where they had never built before. That brings with it really big efforts at conservation and land preservation, and all of that is design. All of that requires sort of a new look and a new aesthetic, and sort of we think of these houses that are accommodating for bringing your family and friends and having a good time and feeling like you're at a different place than in the rest of your life. And that is suffused into textile design and into even jewelry design and furniture and all sorts of different things. And so this morning, I'm so delighted to have our panelists and to have Steele leading us here in a discussion of aspects of design, many of which will make you think about sort of how the island today might have different design needs than it had in the past. And so without further delay, I'm delighted to turn things over to Steele and enjoy our panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. It's really so interesting to consider the history of Nantucket and its evolution from a design perspective. I also want to thank our chairs. Thank you, Stacy and Olivia, so much for all of the hard work you've put into making this week possible. It's been such a delight. Finally, I'm thrilled to welcome these 4 design luminaries, as Michael said. We have an extraordinary panel today, and my only regret is that we can't spend an hour with each one of them because there's that much fabulous material to get through. But we're going to do the best that we have in the hour that we have. We are going to try to save room for audience questions. So please, as we're just talking about legacy and design, hold your questions to the end. And there are some folks who will be walking around with microphones as we as we enter that phase. And so now, without further ado, I'm going to start with some introductions of each panelist and a little bit of a one-on-one conversation with each of them, and then we'll move into a group discussion. So let's see if I can navigate my very complicated slide direction here. I'm going to start with India Hicks. India, we are so thrilled to have you here on Nantucket with us this week. India, as many of you know, is a designer, an author, an entrepreneur, and a philanthropist. And perhaps most importantly, the mother of 5 children. The biggest job.
Exhausting.
Exactly. But yet, at the same time, filled with creativity, I'm sure. She has an incredible legacy of design in her family, as we heard about a little bit yesterday as well. And she divides her time between Harbor Island and England, but of course, really traveling the world, doing all kinds of things, including, most recently, serving as, I want to get this right, you're now working with the Global Empowerment Mission all over the world, which is really, you're doing extraordinary things, which we're going to get into as well. And then last but not least, you also have some fabulous design collaborations, which we're also going to talk about. So, India, you've had a fascinating journey in design. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit what has shaped you in your sort of design perspective and education over your life.
It's incredibly difficult, I think, growing up in the world of design, and I very much did that. My father, as you would have heard yesterday from my brother, I thought, God, what have I got left to say? He said it all yesterday. But having David Hicks and his very imposing eye on everything around you, obviously, did give me a backbone for it. I was never formally trained, but living under the imposing eye of David Hicks, definitely there was an education in it. He designed everything, once including the nose of a client. She said she needed a house in Portugal. He said, first we'll do the nose. He designed my mother's hair. He designed absolutely everything. So I think it was quite hard for me to find my own voice. I was quite intimidated to begin with, to get away from the shadow of this great design heritage. And I think actually, geographically moving away to the Bahamas and living on an island very similar to this in many respects, I think you've got a lot more here than we have. We struggle much more for things. But living on a small island, I think, gave me more confidence to find my own design aesthetic. And I think also living on an island dictated rather how we were going to live that. David and I very much felt we wanted a life that was befitting to the island. We didn't want to alter it or change it in any way. And I have huge respect. Just coming in yesterday on the ferry from Newport and seeing that you still don't have high-rise, you don't have traffic lights, you don't have neon lights. My God, Harbor Island needs to learn a lesson or two, because it's beginning to escape us there, and we need to have tighter regulations. And here it's a perfect example of preservation, how important that is. So I think I found my own voice by getting away from my father.
You described sort of geographic distance and also, frankly, limitations of island life.
Yeah.
And how did you carve out your own voice? How would you describe your own voice as distinct from the family heritage that you had?
Well, again, it was interesting because my mother quietly sat on the sofa. She had lived an extraordinary life, doing many things. She was a lady in waiting to the Queen. Actually, there, the moment the Queen became Queen, she had been there during independence. She sat with Gandhi at prayer meetings. So she'd had an amazing life. She had 2 very dynamic parents. So she was very much in the shadow, always in the shadow. Obviously, as a lady in waiting, 2 steps behind and all the rest of it. But she was happy to be in the shadow. And then she marries David Hicks, even more in the shadow, because there was this whirling dervish. And he made all the design decisions, everything, which is fairly unusual in a couple, that the man is making all the design decisions. But she was fine with that. Unfortunately, David, who's sitting in the back of the room here today, David and I both care. And that's much more of a problem, because then there's the horrible word that I hate, compromise.
Compromise. Who wants to do anything like that?
But I think also we're quite lucky. I think David and I do have a similar design aesthetic. We both love traditional, probably with a little twist here or there. I'm not nearly as dynamic or forthright, and you used lots of lovely words earlier, like blasts of colour from David Hicks. My father was very dramatic in his designing, and I'm not, which probably makes me much more boring, much more boring. But I think my David, it gets very Freudian. My father, David, my husband, David. My husband, David, and I do share a similar aesthetic, which helps. and because of the geography of it, we wanted, as you can see, on the wall here. We inherited that chandelier. We said, my God, it's awful. We've got to take it down, and we never did. It's been there for 27 years. When we inherited the house, it was there. So there are strange bits that we just went with because of living on an island where you can't get everything. But then I developed into different chapters, which we can chat about later, but, getting into product design and other things that I felt very excited by as well. So design is definitely in my life, in every aspect of my life. I love it. But my life has also moved on and beyond just the design world.
Yes, which we're definitely going to talk about. But we're moving, from this very sort of island where, again, I would almost throw the word bohemian in, you sort of accept what you can't change and add your own spin, but now we're looking at something altogether different.
Yes, well, this is a result of children growing very big. We used to stay, my mother was very, very patient and had me and my 5 children to stay a lot. And then I had 4 boys and 1 girl, and then they began to grow, and we began to slightly grow out of the house. So we decided it was time to build our own home. And we're 2 fields away from her, so very close. So I spend a lot of time still with her. In fact, occasionally when I go to England, I don't even stay in my own house. I just stay with my mum because I want to be there with her so we can have breakfast together and bed and tea together and all the important things we do with our mums. But this is the house that Dave and I built. Again, we wanted something that felt very traditional to the area that we live in Oxfordshire. We didn't want to change it in any way. So we found a farmhouse, a Georgian farmhouse quite close by, and we rather emulated it. And then, very obvious things, 4-poster beds. Of course, my father always had a 4-poster bed, so we decided to have that in our home. So I think for the Bahamas to England, we've got 2 very different lives, but I think the design aesthetic marries itself quite nicely between the 2.
So beautiful. Here, are we still in England?
We are. Okay. We're actually in England and the Bahamas.
Ah.
That's very clever. Look how clever I've been. I didn't even realise. 2 fires going. And actually, we live in the tropics. It does get very hot, but David loves a fire. So sometimes we're like, oh my God, he's lit a fire on a tropical day. But we've got England on one side where you can see a purple leather chair there that was inherited from my father again. And these things sort of arrive and get placed, and we never think about moving them. And actually, that Ashley designed the stool there. So that's England, and then we've got the Bahamas, and again, that slightly ornate fireplace, which I would never have chosen. But again, we inherited the house with it, and it just kind of, you're not going to go to the trouble of removing a fireplace in the Bahamas, so we just left it. So things have just sort of grown organically around bits. But in England, we made every decision. We designed the house for our family, and I think that's very important for me, the word family. Everything that we do and the way we design and the way we live is for those 5 little
This is a great, the image on the left, I feel like also is very illustrative.
Yes, and I think that David Flintwood gets all the credit for that. The swimming pool David Hicks gets the credit for, but the desk and the printer's tray, which we filled with shells that I collected when I was diving, and that writing desk there, David had the brilliant idea of making a sort of scrap wall. My father did scrap books. He kept everything, and David Flintwood did a scrap wall there. It was kind of fun. We've got Bruce Weber Christmas cards. We've got old leaves written with friends. It's sort of like, in a way, a kind of guest book and a photo album on the wall, which is fun. And then the pool there, David Hicks designed because he felt that, obviously the eye should travel. In fact, I don't know whether Ashley touched on this yesterday, but this avenue of trees he planted when he had drunk a lot of the money away. We moved from the big house. That's a joke, by the way. You can laugh. We moved from the big house into what's known as the Dower House, which is where my mother still lives, and this is where she is today. And so he planted those avenues. And again, he had such foresight, and I know we're going to learn more about gardens and passion for that. But it is incredible. He always felt that a room was rather boring after a while because it was done, it was finished. But gardens were exciting because they continued to grow and mature. And to his credit, look at the legacy here. Talk about legacy of that avenue of trees. Right at the end there was an annoying wood that was blocking the view, very annoying. So he said, no. And he sent the tractors down, and they removed it so that there was a keyhole so the eye could travel on through. He then realized he didn't own the wood. It was someone else's wood. So that had to be dealt with very quickly. So here we do have England and we have the Bahamas.
Love it. And of course, you've written a beautiful book all about entertaining, and I so associate you with a gracious style of hospitality where you invite casts of hundreds, if not thousands, to join you at the table. And I wanted to ask you about, You know, how did you cultivate this passion for bringing people together around a table?
Interesting that, because I do now find myself talking more and more about entertaining, which is slightly, you go, oh my God, there are other things in the world that are important. But we do love to entertain, and I think that is because we have space, because living in the Bahamas, we do have a garden, and we do have the climate for it. In England, you're much more stuck inside, limited. And I think once we discovered actually you can entertain very inexpensively. We have folding tables we buy on Amazon. We've got folding bamboo chairs. We store them in the store, and then we just bring them out. And again, we can't go and get a florist to come and do the flowers. We can't buy new fabrics. We can't do all that. So you do get quite resourceful. So we rely a lot on Mother Nature. Whatever she's providing at the time, I'll go and cut off boughs from the tree and put it down wherever we are. I think COVID changed quite a lot of that from these big dramatic tables that we were doing. COVID, we then obviously were eating much more as a family. And then afterwards, I began to find that actually having much more intimate dinners was much more amusing, really being with people you wanted to have a conversation with. So that changed it. I have to say, though, I am very lucky in the fact that I can't cook. Never learned to cook. My mother said, darling, never learn to play bridge, but never learn to cook either. She felt if you learn to play bridge, then you're always the fourth. You have to go. There's no excuse out. Don't learn to cook either. So I'm very lucky in the fact that I have a top banana in the kitchen. So I do have the time to then spend time making the tables look beautiful. But I do love to entertain. I think it's a wonderful way of gathering people, having memorable evenings, and interesting conversation. It takes so little to light the candles and make it look pretty. In fact, I'm delighted to see the two little tables here in front of us. I suddenly realized, well, my fabrics on there, my table linens. I work with a lovely company called Pomegranate Ink. And we do limited collections. And again, this is the avenue of trees that David and I planted when we moved to the Bahamas, and there they are now, hand block printed on table linens. So I have fun with the designs. So it's not just rooms or hotels, which we began with. It's sort of gone from big down to small, which I love. In the same way that we had those big long tables, we've now gone down to a much more intimate way of design.
Let's talk about product design for a minute, because again, you have some really wonderful collaborations. I happen to love Pomegranate Linen so much. She's really brilliant. But how do you sort of maintain your own identity as a designer when working with another brand? How do you sort of bring the two visions together?
That's a brilliant question, which I am not prepared for. I didn't send that
Sorry.
Brilliant question, actually, and I love these collaborations. For a number of years, 6 years, I traveled across this amazing country of yours, and I didn't know America at all, but I had a lifestyle brand, and I worked with a network of amazing women, and together we empowered each other, and we were so excited, and we learnt things, and we grew. And then it failed, although I'm not allowed to use the word fail. It closed. We elegantly closed it, but it really failed. As many startups do. But actually, it broke my heart because I'd worked so hard and I couldn't understand. We were designing such beautiful product. We were really having fun as well as making businesses in doing this. But we were really a super sophisticated Avon, and it wasn't quite the right time for that, I don't think. We would never have survived COVID, so in fact it was good luck. And afterwards I did many other things that I've grown into really loving, and I would never have done if the business had succeeded. So it was a very humbling time for me, picking myself back up, having lost this business. You know, we had 5,000 ambassadors across America, and really I had poured my soul into this. But in coming back in, I dipped my toe gently back into design, and I discovered it was wonderful partnering with other companies who invited me to collaborate with them. But you do have to be careful, because when I work with Pomegranate, it has to feel pomegranate, but also India Hicks. I want to bring my own point of view, my own sensibility. So you do tread carefully in making sure that their design aesthetic is, I don't drift too far away. But I work with wonderful people. Penelope Chilvers in England, we design boots together. I'm just about to do bedding again. So lots of different ways, and I love it. They're small artisanal companies. I get a voice in it. I love working. I go to the workshops. I really understand the meaning behind it all. In fact, I'm going to quickly do this. Today, Pomegranate Inc. are offering 20% off anything, not mine. Everybody, if you go to Pomegranate, it's and you put in Newport 20% off. Got that in. Thank you.
I'm so glad you did, but say it one more time.
You are
Newport.
Newport? Oh, she's actually letting me do this.
Okay, yeah.
Newport 20 on
Newport
Pomegranate
20,
Inc.
okay.
website. Anything on the website, put Newport 20 and you get 20% off. Isn't that lovely?
It is.
That plug in.
I do think it's very, I was reminding myself yesterday of your different collaborations, and you have chosen really wonderful businesses. They're small, very bespoke, beautiful product and craftsmanship, and I would imagine that's very gratifying. One more question in your amazing scope. How, with Global Empowerment Mission, how do you feel like your sort of legacy in design and career in design has prepared you for this kind of work? And tell us a little bit about what kind of work you're doing with them.
Well, thank you. We really are drifting away from design, but this is really important to me too. You know, I think the world is changing. We live in a very chaotic world right now. Here in Nantucket, it feels so lovely and protected and peaceful, but it is chaos out there. And as I said, after I lost my business, I was licking my wounds somewhat, and a terrible, devastating hurricane came by, Hurricane Dorian, and just 70 miles away from where we live, 2 islands were literally obliterated. And as you know, living on small islands, it can be utterly devastating in the rebuilding and how long it takes. And so I stumbled across a remarkable man called Michael Capone, who was doing remarkable things with a foundation he had started called Global Empowerment Mission. And he'd started in Haiti, and he was expanding out. And so I began to work with him. And so we rebuilt Abaco and really focused. What I liked about what he was doing, it was a sort of 1, 2, 3. He went in with immediate disaster relief, you know, very important, these boxes of hope, I call them. Obviously inside there are battery packs, there are Airbnb cards, there's blankets, there's what, it depends on the actual disaster itself, what's inside the box. But I think when you hand that box, it's not just handing someone very practical food for a month, whatever it is. It's also handing them hope that they're not forgotten. Many agencies go in and out and they do this. But what is important is not just that initial thing, it's the staying and the rebuilding, because these communities come in, but you need to rebuild. We rebuilt a school, we didn't rebuild it just as a school, we rebuilt it as a hurricane shelter. So God forbid, if that community is ever faced with a climate change disaster on the scale that we saw, they have somewhere that they can go that's safe. After the invasion in Ukraine, Global Empowerment were there, even though they were doing natural disasters. They were there 3 days after this man-made disaster. And I've been now 4 or 5 times out to Ukraine with Global Empowerment Mission, and it is devastating and heartbreaking and utterly disgusting what you see. And war it's just extraordinary that in this day and age, it still happens. How have we not learnt lessons? So it's very important to me. And when I do my collaborations with the wonderful, wonderful people I get to work with, I'm always saying, how can we spread the word? How can we put this to other use as well? So I'm hoping that in my life now at this moment, it's a wonderful world of design, and I'm so grateful to be at places like this and talking about it. But also there's a deeper meaning behind everything. So actually a lot of the collections I do, we give a percentage back, or there's a way of gathering people together. I'm going to Sag Harbor to do a big fundraiser for Global Empowerment after this. And so hopefully just raising awareness for causes that are important. So thank you for asking.
No, of course. I mean, I think it's just so, especially with all that the world has been through over the last 5 years, you know, design and beauty matters and can be very powerful and transformative in other people's lives. So I'm glad you got to touch on that. Okay, I'm moving us right along with the letter I. Moving to Wambui. Wambui, thank you so much for joining us on Nantucket.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody.
Wambui is a landscape designer based in New York, and she has experience doing commercial projects, residential projects, and public spaces, both for adults and for children, that we're going to see here. But I would also say Wambui truly loves plants. Her Instagram handle is Wambui Loves Plants, and it's 100% authentic. She trained as a horticulturalist, and that's what sort of opened you to the world of landscape design. And part of your practice is to sort of enhance human relationships with nature, which we're going to explore. You also mentioned that you create timeless and healing landscapes, which we're also going to explore. So, like India, Wambui, you had a very sort of global upbringing. Can you tell us a little bit how that shaped you and your point of view as a designer?
Okay, thanks. So I come from a very old family in East Africa. We've been up and down East Africa for thousands of years. On my mother's side, Ethiopia, Eritrea. On my dad's side, coming out of Rwanda. So we've always been everywhere. And Nicholas, you were talking about that book you read where this guy walked through Africa. My great-grandfather did that when he was 20. He walked from East Africa to South. So I have this history of moving. And then my mother happened to be a diplomat, so that meant we were everywhere growing up. My dad came here as a teenage boy with Barack Obama's father on that. They were on the same flight.
Wow.
My dad ended up, Barack's dad ended up in Harvard. My father ended up in Oregon, of all places. So imagine this young African boy ending up in Oregon, and all the stories that they then brought back. So growing up, I grew up everywhere, moving, with my mother and seeing things. And my mother is a very, very intelligent woman, very, very smart woman. So if we had 2 hours off the plane and we happened to be in Paris, she would say, and I think I shared this on the Zoom the 5 of us had.
Yes.
We get off the plane and my mom says, okay, we have 3 hours, we're in Paris, it's December, let's go to Hermes and look at the windows. Let's go look at, if anybody knows Leila Menshari, who passed away from Hermes, remember she did those wonderful vitrines in Paris. So my mom thought that was education. Wherever you are, you get off the plane and you run and you look at the windows and you take all these pictures and, you go home. Okay, we're in Costa Rica. What can we see in Costa Rica, So that's how I grew up. And my mother, after my father died, my mother was always about education. You have to have the best education. So if you walk in a room, you're coming in there with something. You can have a conversation with anybody. So later on, it was, I went to school, I did my best, so that when I walk into a room as a 19-year-old, as a 25-year-old, I can go up to whoever and say, I really like what you did with your house. I saw it in a magazine. And they say, oh, look at this little African girl. And she's really, maybe I need her around me,
She's paying attention.
And then that opens up more opportunities. So I've been very lucky.
Well, you've been shaping your eye through traveling the
Exactly.
world. I mentioned this in the introduction, but how do you connect people to their own history or their own sort of, design legacy through your landscape design? Tell us a little bit about your approach.
So, one, I read a lot, and in thinking about, for instance, interior design, a lot of it is about found objects, right? And how do you create legacy in a garden with found objects? You think about where you come from. You think about where everybody here is the child or grandchild or great-grandchild of an immigrant who had a very rich history wherever they came from, Italy or wherever they came from. And you can bring that history into your landscape. So is it a cutting from a tree, from your great-great-grandma's garden? Is it a rhododendron? Everybody's grandma had rhododendrons. Is it, transporting that rhododendron from your mom's higgledy-piggledy garden into your garden? And creating that sense of space. And I think I said this when we were doing the Savannah College of Art and Design thing. I always tell people, if you're buying a property, always buy a property with trees in it, old trees. Because once you have a tree, you have history, and you have place, and
amazing?
you can create anything around a tree. A tree is the most important thing on a site for me. It's not the house, it's what trees do you have on a space? So thinking about your family, thinking about your history, bringing pieces from all these gardens that you visited, and a tree. That is the most important thing in a landscape.
I'm going to skip around because I realize now we're looking at a slide of a public park, whereas the
yes.
first two were private residential.
Yeah.
The difference between, designing a public space versus a private one, how does that sense of, timelessness or connection to legacy or that sort of thing, how does that differ when you're working in a public space?
Okay, so this is actually the backside of the ABC studios in New York. So
Wow.
anybody from New York, 10 West 66, this is ABC Studios.
Wow.
So they wanted a woodland garden. They wanted that feel. And if 10 West 66 ABC Studios, it's madness, right? So the man in charge said, we just need a place where we can just come out, just sit down and feel like we're not in this studio, craziness. So basically it was
Forest
just,
bathing in the city.
And I had happened, right before this commission, I had just come off of working at David Letterman's place. And that was just 165 acres of trees and green. And so it was just, oh, I can do that here, you know. So this is how this happened.
Did you bring the trees in, or were they already
So
there?
we sourced trees.
Okay.
So this is slightly bigger than what you
What we
see.
see.
And then last year, after we put this in, this was about 5 years ago, a big oil spill. There was a big oil
Oh, no.
truck. So all this was gone.
Oh, no.
This was all gone. They were fueling, you know, and so the oil. So now this is all in the process of being redone. I think I answered your question.
You did.
Okay.
Now, and I'm moving to a new slide, but I'm going to ask a slight follow-up because we emailed
Okay.
about this yesterday. But what about when working with children's spaces in particular?
So I grew up in East Africa, which meant I grew up outside. Whenever we were home, we were always outside in the Rift Valley.
Should I go here?
Yes, so this is actually home in Kenya. And I've always felt really sorry for many kids in New York, especially, because their idea of nature is Central Park.
Yep.
Their idea of nature is you know, that's what they think nature is a park or a playground. And so I've always felt sorry. And I work, one of my clients had an autistic child, and, you know, she was asking me to design something that just felt so unnatural. And I said, well, you know, why don't we try making it as wild as possible, because you have your son, and maybe that'll help him, you know. And it turns out that having that natural landscape where we just took grasses and just threw them in and just kind of left it wild helped her son, like, really, you know, relax. So when I design for children, it's always about the feeling that I'm trying to replicate of what I had growing up outside, which was, this was not a policed landscape. This was not signs saying stay off the grass or don't touch or you know. It was get out there and dig and be free. So
That is such a beautiful.
so yeah, so my
beautiful-
mom bought this house probably 45 years ago.
Wow.
And now this is now my home, and this is a garden that I've been working on for 20 years. And the guy on the right here is Ogutu, who's the gardener who never works when we're not there, and then when we show up, he's like all busy, you know.
So he's
And
very busy.
Yeah, you know, we have monkeys.
This is
we
proof.
have monkeys. We have black mamba snakes. We
Oh
have
my
green
gosh.
mamba snakes. We have all kinds of wildlife, and I just kind of leave it, you know.
It's beautiful.
Leave it to, and the owners of this house, the people who built this house in the 1800s, were actually two British sisters who were spinsters, and they came out to teach and built the house and lived there and died, and you know,
What a great
my
house.
mom bought the house. Yeah.
I'm going backwards for a minute. Can you talk to us about this space?
So this is actually Diane Sawyer's house,
beautiful.
penthouse. So this is another.
in the city.
This is in the city. This is like in the Upper East Side.
Beautiful.
And the idea was to create something just where she could just come out and just relax, you know. And very simple. We don't do frou-frou when we do this work. And, you know, we just wanted to make it timeless, classy, clean, easy to maintain in a very tight space. So a lot of the spaces that I work in, especially in Manhattan, are very tight. So it's that illusion of a grand garden.
And the lushness. I
And
mean,
the
there's
lushness.
So much green.
Exactly.
This, our creative director and I paired these two slides together. I hope we did that appropriately. But there was a note about sort of plant pairings that kind of went with this. What's going on in these two detail shots?
So just a little bit of my history. So when I was a poor college student, I met Martha Stewart at my school. And I really wanted to work for her. And she had been following our portfolios in school, and she asked me to
Interesting.
she asked me to go work for her. So I made $11.50 an hour, and I would get up at 4:30 in the morning, and I would go there to learn about how she puts plants together. Because people think she's, Martha, 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 but what she really is a horticulturalist, and she is a fabulous horticulturalist. And from her, I learned about texture and
Wow.
putting plants together for texture. Because when you walk out into a garden, you always want something to catch your eye, right? It's not about 5 rhododendrons, and it's not about 10 hydrangeas. It's about what's hiding in there,
Yeah.
right? So that's what I learned from her. So this garden was a garden that I did in Philadelphia that won the Philadelphia Flower Show. And yeah, it was just about creating a very pretty, feminine, just a beautiful feminine garden, pairing all those ideas that I learned at Martha's place.
Last but not least, we're out of the city now, and
Yeah.
we're in a much more sort of expansive landscape. And
So now we are in Riverdale, and then on the right is Hastings on Hudson. So on the left is, this is also probably about a 25-year-old garden, and right on the other side of those trees is a synagogue. So these clients wanted to be, they're practicing, they're not Orthodox, but they're very, I don't know what the word is, practicing Jews.
reform? I don't know.
Yeah, that. And they wanted to be able to walk to the synagogue through nature.
Oh, wow.
Every day. So I mean, it was just, this one was all about the fall, fall colors. So
Beautiful.
that's on the left, and then on the right, that is right by the Hudson River. So right on the other side is the Palisades, and they just wanted a meadow. And this is one of my continuing clients, the one I was telling you about yesterday. So,
Beautiful.
yeah, just a beautiful meadow, and
Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to move right along to Thomas, and we are already behind, but I'm going to do my very best. Thomas runs Jayne Design Studio in New York, but he also lives part of the year in New Orleans. Thomas has a very strong connection to history and place, and you can see that in all of his work. And he studied architectural history as well as decorative arts history long before becoming an interior designer, which I think certainly fuels your sort of perspective. He also worked for 2 very well-established and well-known design firms before launching out on his own, Parrish Hadley and Kevin McNamara. And last but not least, certainly, Thomas is an author, like many of us on stage. You have written 3 books on American design and decorative history, which we were talking about earlier this morning. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the one shown on this slide, and how your sort of lifelong studies of American design have sort of informed your design point of view for clients as well. That's a loaded question. First, tell us about the book.
Well, overarching idea that is in all my work and all my observation is you can't belie your own time and place, and that you might make something that you think is terribly French or terribly antique in appearance, or any quality that you look to for design inspiration. But if you step back, even if it's a decade, you'll look at it and say, oh, that's so 1990s, or that's so 2000. So you have to understand that you're always part of your time and generation, and that the influences you take on might form those things, but you can't escape your own time. which once you acknowledge that, it makes life a lot easier. So, but one of the books that has always fascinated me is a book called The Decoration of Houses, and it was written by Edith Wharton and Ogden Codman, and it is considered by many to be the most important decorating book ever written, and that's high praise. And the reason is because they took the topics of decoration from room types to and parts of rooms, and made them into chapters. And I'm sure we all have decorating books at home that do the same thing, but they were the first people to really codify it into a system. Of course, the first chapter is, what is traditional, and the received historic tradition. And then the next chapter is rooms and types of rooms. And then they break it down into ceilings and floors and walls, and down to nurseries and other spaces. And so it was the first time that we really had that analysis, and that was in 1897. And it was a very exciting time to be in America because people were starting to look at classic models to employ them into buildings. And they were all excited that these great, noble models were influencing American landscape. And we all can think about those buildings today. There's some in Nantucket. There's certainly the New York Public Library is a classic one, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, all up and down, all over America, there are classical buildings were built at the turn of the 19th to 20th century to these ennobled models. And then in terms of her decoration, it was the same. And one of my favorite classic quotes from her is about classicism, and she said, a classic is a classic because of a certain irrefutable freshness. And that is something that's fascinating to me. And today, being in Nantucket, where classics are so celebrated, we can all see their value firsthand. How's that for an answer?
That's beautiful. And I love that quote, and I'm glad you shared it. And it leads right into my next question, which is perfectly timed for being in Nantucket. Of course, this is a house that you designed on Nantucket. And it's a very historic property. And I'm wondering, when you're working in a historic home like this, how do you honor a building's own design legacy while at the same time sort of infusing it with something altogether new?
Make it fresh for today.
Yes.
Well, first of all, when I was pulling my slides, my young colleague, William Cullum, looked at it and said, you've got to do something more recent. And in this room is probably 15 or 20 years old. And I didn't really think it looked old or unrecent, so that kind of proves your point that you think you're. So this house was built in the 1830s and then had long history as being one of the houses on Main Street, one of the 3 brick houses. And first of all, my client completely eschewed the 19th century, does not like the 19th century, wanted anything 19th century taken away. So we didn't do, of course we didn't do that, but there were things like big Cornelius chandeliers are now in the collection of the Historic Nantucket Association, for example. So using a 19th century idiom, we furnished the house for family use. And one of the great experiences was coming up here and looking at the house, and there was a really nice architect who wanted to take off the whole back of the house and add his and her master bath, proper bedrooms. And I said quietly to him, let's live in the house for a year and see how it goes and how it adapts to family life. And in the end, we did not pull off the back of the house. And we were able to make all the rooms work for this young family. And this is the dining room, which, having a formal dining room in Nantucket seems out of fashion, but we maintained it. And one of the great things is in the 20s, they put the funny infill cabinets next to the fireplace with the cane heater, radiator covers. And the architects just did not think that those should be saved because they were not pure. And I thought, well, they're kind of quirky and original. So we kept them. And then above
Plus
it,
they add island texture.
They do, and they're novel, and they were there. So, and then we found a bunch of things when we were renovating the house, and I put them into the cabinet. So the cabinet above it is a little museum of found objects on the house. So the legacy really was to take the historic materials, see it through a lens of our client, and then make specific historic references.
Does the client have an appreciation for the 19th century now?
Well,
as I move on to your next part.
They love classicism.
Okay.
But our client, who probably many of you know, so you know her, she's pretty practical. She's a mother. She's not so much interested in design as having a comfortable house. Yeah. And her husband's more interested in design per se. But she just said to me last summer, she said, it's such an easy house to be in the summer. It always has a view. The rooms are always comfortable. It is so livable.
Look how refreshing that color. It just feels.
And it's a really strict Georgian interior.
Yeah.
It is not an open plan.
Right.
It is all the things we think are comfortable are really not there, except that there's big, comfortable chairs and places to sit and things they love.
Yeah. There you go. You just said it, I think. That's what makes something comfortable. We're looking at another Nantucket project here. And I'm wondering, I didn't know as much about this one as I was formulating the slides and the questions, but I'm going to move to the two interior photos. This one to me really echoes a sense of place. Did that inform what you did here?
My clients, our patrons are in the room, so we have to say really nice things. But the house was built in the 70s as a family house, actually with a plan of 3 cabins. And within the historic restrictions of Nantucket, they wanted to make a house with some presence, and it fit into a broader range of classicism than sometimes the Nantucket Preservation Board would allow. And so it has a sense of arrival. It's on the old harbor. And the dining room was between the 2 cabins, and we filled that in a few years ago. But we kept the old gray shingled walls, which were given as for continuity. But
So
interestingly, the contractor he didn't think that saving the old shingles was a good idea, so he put up new shingles.
Oh, goodness.
So we kind of had to go harvest old shingles off
Oh, my gosh.
another building to like make it all work. So there's a sense of artifice there.
And what's happening in the kitchen on the floor and then the backsplash?
Kitchen it's a family house. 3 generations now use it. So the kitchen was expanded to have 2 islands and a big commercial stove, and then to bind it all together, we had a pattern that we had used in Philadelphia, and I like it. It's a pinwheel pattern that looks. I like it because it travels. It goes, and it also has a really American aspect, but a very classical aspect. So it ticks a lot of boxes for us, and that integrates it. And their collection of blue and white tiles too really added a lot, which those came. Those were there before. I mean, they were not. I think were they bought for the project, or anyway, we added those in because they had a nice relationship to their time overseas.
And I'm going to go really quickly with this last question. We're going to look at 2 slides, but you have such a command of object, of sort of material culture and arranging objects, Thomas. And I think that speaks a lot to legacy in an interior design project. But between both this project and this next room, there's such an interesting sort of juxtaposition of object and such in space. And I wonder if you can sort of elaborate on your philosophy when it comes to arranging objects and legacy.
Well, Rick's here, my husband, and he taught me a couple things that I think we all should be aware of. One is that if it wasn't pretty then, it's not pretty now.
Something to be said for that.
So we're not organizing ugly things, so it makes it a lot easier. And I think when you look, I always think of decorations. I often think of decorations as being collage, where you take things and bring them together because of their shape and sculpture and color. And if you have an artist's eye, making a collage is possible. And when you're interior decorating, you look at things and how they go together, and how they interact in shape and form and texture. So this is a house that I would not try to take on in the privacy of your own home as an amateur, because we had our client is part of our client's team he's an engineer with a great eye. And then, obviously I brought a tradition of modern things from my life in Los Angeles, and then the love of antiques and how they would all go together. And we spent time arranging them until they all looked good together. And that was not easy, but I think the net result was extremely good. And this room actually the contents came from an historic townhouse, moved into a modern apartment, so we had even more of a challenge of how to make arrangement show off the collection of decorative arts. And unlike Philistine-type clients who might have had a house full of antique and move into a modern house and throw everything away and go modern. They were cultured, and they moved all their old things forward. And I think the results are much more interesting
Fresh.
and richer. And,
Yeah.
and I have two rules that you need to have something old in a room, and you have to have something from your own time and generation. You need something 21st century in your room also. And that tension always makes a successful interior.
Love that. Last but not least, I believe this is your bedroom?
Yes.
And there's, again, just such a richness in terms of the juxtaposition here of objects and color.
So this is a super ugly Victorian bed that was my great-grandfather's, and I've used it all my life, and as I always call it, the decorator challenge. So how do you make it look attractive, even though it's, Stuart Feld was mentioned today, and he collects all, he sells all the greatest 19th century American furniture, and I can just imagine him looking at this and thinking, oh my gosh. But I really love using it. I love how it feels. I love the continuity. I like the juxtaposition. And this bed was greatly enhanced by Rick's arrangement of objects and things around it, because everything from the pillows, which came from the Duchess of Windsor sale. We bought all of her old pillows, pug stains and all. And then the bed's great. It anchors the room, and we were able to float it onto the color cube, which was a modern device. And then, what I really love is everything that you see in that has a personal story.
That's amazing.
And including the plaques, which our house is being photographed from the New York Times, and I just had the bed and the cube, and I go, God, it needs something more. And I went and I had seen these plaques, but not afforded them, and I said, okay, that's what we need. So the giltwood plaques on the blue ground were purchased for the benefit of photography.
And it really works.
And also, they suit the aspects of the crucifixion, so they're not, they suit our religion too, but, and there's a lot to say about that picture. But sometimes it's good to when a client has something very sentimental they want to keep and it's not pretty, you make it look good, and this was a license. This is our training.
It's wonderful. Last but not least, Nicholas, you've been patiently waiting to tell your story.
So interesting to hear everybody talk. It's great.
Nicholas Varney is a jewelry designer. I was going to say based in New York, but that's no longer true.
No,
Quite the global citizen as well. He's in the process of, can I share, moving to Ireland,
Yeah.
which is wonderful and very much a part of your design legacy, which we'll get to. You also studied jewelry design in Europe. I was intrigued to learn, and so much of your design legacy, of course, comes from your parents. Both Carlton, fabulous interior designer, oversaw Dorothy Draper's company for many, many years, and then your mother, who launched Carlton V Textiles as well. Mm-hmm. That said, you have very much your own vision, and so I would love to hear how did growing up in a design family like yours sort of influence you as an artist today?
It wasn't really a design family. We didn't. I mean, yes, it was designers, plural, but it was more about color. We never really got past color in any conversation, and that was really the most important conversation we'd have. We'd talk about color all the time, and color became not a concept but a language. And it was sort of imprinted on me that it is a language. And we pick up things from color, different colors in different ways. For instance, like all of us do, a Coke can, McDonald's, a Pringles box, it's all the same red.
Wow.
So what does that mean? What are we taking out of that red? Well, what we're taking is, for people that don't speak English and come to this country, that's sugar.
That's right.
Absolutely sugar. And when we look at the bees and we look at the birds, and they're going into a hibiscus. We spent a lot of time in the Caribbean as children. The bird is going into that hibiscus for sugar too. Mm-hmm. So these concepts of what color does to your brain and how they can imprint you was really what we were into. That's what we
Amazing.
talked about all the time, and it wasn't restricted to red, it was restricted to color relationships too, and how colors spoke to one another, and how you could travel within the framework of small changes in color. For instance, I went to school in Vicenza for jewelry design, and my father came over and visited me one time. And he took me to Rubelli, which is a fabric house in Venice, and Mr. Rubelli came out and put all these fabrics on the ground. And we wound up choosing, or Carlton wound up choosing, this fabric with it. It was a sort of David Hicks kind of style, geometry, but with aqua blue and like a salmon orange.
Ooh, beautiful.
So he wound up using it as a lambrequin at the Breakers Hotel facing the ocean. And it was always very much of that aqua blue and that salmon was always a very Venetian combination, because when you're in Venice, you go out, you see the water, and those walls of the buildings that you'd see stained by the sun became that salmon color. It was sort of a pastiche of different tones, but it was ultimately like a salmon color. And so I've done some pieces of jewelry that were salmon and blue, sort of referencing that time. But what I think you tend to notice when you play within tones of colors, if you change that salmon a little bit, just maybe more tangerine, you're immediately not in Venice. You're in Palm Springs at Howard Johnson's.
Right.
You know, it's that it's that same deal. And that's a quick trip.
That's a quick trip. A lot of miles.
So, yeah. So, and Howard Johnson's happened to be a Dorothy Draper job as well. But the relationships between colors in pieces, I think, is the most interesting thing. And ultimately, all of it, we express ourselves not necessarily through one color all the time, but between two colors or three colors or four colors ultimately. And what I was very proud of my father especially for was, I like to, by the way, reference music as, so if I look at music as the art form that teaches me more than anything else. There's a term in music, it's called a grace note. And a grace note is a note out of scale. So when people play their progressions of chords, you can stay in sort of a scale. And it's all pretty. It's like designing with green and blue and yellow. Really, it's only two colors. But it's always going to be pretty. Can't mess up too far. But when you hit a note out of the scale, that's when magic happens. And Carlton was able to do these, let's say a room in blue and yellow and green. But then he put this gigantic red lacquer lamp in the middle of it. And that, in music, is like the equivalent of a grace note, where you hit that note out of scale and drag it into scale. And I think you create a completely different language when you don't play within the rules. And that was something that was really prevalent in all the conversations. Break every rule you can break, because they were built to be broken. And if you want to change the language, if you want to change the vernacular of how you see color, how you see design, you need to break those rules. And I think it creates a balance throughout all of it.
I was going to ask if he was prescriptive about colors, but it sounds like he was actually quite permissive with color.
I think sometimes people would think that if you have a father that's as powerful with his visual language and his presence as he was, somehow it would be intimidating. I never was intimidated by it at all. It was just part of the language. And I love to take him on. I love to take that dude on. And his later years, in which I started just beginning to understand now, I was critical of him. I would say, "Why are you using all these candy colors, dude?" I was like, "It's all state fair stuff." But and this is a man I idolized. I absolutely adored my father. What he was doing in the 70s was different than later on, and I knew he wanted to stay in a time. He didn't want to go forward. He didn't like what was 2047, 2050. He looked back, and I look back more than I look forward, because I think I think there's some depth and there's something very savory about all of that. And our early apartments in New York, I remember the color combinations were just so extraordinary, mixing those aubergines and salmons with the sugar colors like aqua blues and the reds that I just mentioned. I was just so proud of that guy. Like he could speak, and he always was authentic. You can go into one of his rooms and you know it's that guy.
Yeah,
And
there's something to be said for that.
That's what he always wanted me to do. He said, just create your own language. You're never going to be me.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't named Carlton because he wanted me to be my own person, basically. But that was the goal. Speak your own language. It's all a language. And how you do it, there's no rules. Like Keith Richards, for instance, I bring him up because I like to bring him up. When he plays guitar in the Stones, he takes his high E string off, so it's 5 strings, not 6, and he tunes his guitar out of tune. Now, that is breaking the rules. Like you're supposed to play like in tune at least, right? But he's created a different vibe, completely his own, by changing the rule book. And I think that's essential. If you're not breaking the rules, you're not trying enough.
We see obviously extraordinary color combinations here, but I want to move to here.
Yeah.
Which is equally stunning and yet altogether different. And so as you are sort of navigating and finding your own voice
Right.
as an artist, is there a push-pull between that color sort of legacy that you have and your own sort of need to connect with nature as an artist?
If there's any, when I go neutral, I feel like I'm breaking my father's rule, because he would sit around, when he did speeches, every single time he'd do it, he'd say, I hate a beige room, I feel like I'm sitting naked in a bowl of oatmeal. and he meant it. He meant it. So when I do neutrals, it goes into an area that I wasn't brought up with. But I love doing it. I often, like the bracelet on the left is Japanese, and what I love about the Japanese people is they're really ultimately irreverent about the amount of time that they waste, essentially. There's a progression based in nature that I think they have. So when they build a building, for instance, they don't like cut 2 pieces of wood and nail them together. What they'll do is they'll take a longer piece of wood and they'll dip it in water and they'll steam it, and it'll bend. And then they'll do it again, and it'll bend. And they will get to the point where they understand, they bent it so much, it's one piece, that nature will not let them bend it anymore. And I try to use that Japanese line in the jewelry, where you have a natural limitation to how far you can curve things. And I'm much more interested in a curved line than I am a straight line. Like with a curved line, you have no room for error. There's no, like if it's a Chippendale table and that leg is down. I used to walk around, I had this one guy who would teach me about furniture, and I'd say, what's a good leg? What's a good leg? And he'd say, that's an obvious question. Does the table look like it can jump off the floor? And he was dead right about that. Does the table look like it can jump off the floor? If that line of that leg is not right, it will not look like it can jump off the floor. But if it does, you got it right. And I like the danger of getting it wrong too. Like I've made so many bad pieces of jewelry, broken them up, do it again, just to find the movement and the balance and the it's ultimately movement of the pieces. The other piece was, my mother had a necklace like this. It was done by a woman in Greenwich Village that she used to go see all the time, a woman named Marguerite Stix, who wrote a book about the shell, who I think was just brilliant. So I didn't want to do a shell, so I used agate in that. But I was trying to put as much modest, non-jewelry material into it as I could, because I think once you've got diamonds, I need a foil for that. I need the yin with the yang. So that is, I sent the agate to Belgium, and I also pulled hair off my horse's mane.
Oh my gosh.
And I dyed the horse's hair the same color as the agate, and then wove it on a loom with that's leather, it's mother of pearl. I needed to put some like actual sea element into the piece, and then ebony. So it was a combination of different materials.
I was disappointed to learn that that's not a favor for attending today's talk, but anyway, we'll move on. There's something that I do see connecting back to your father and your mother in these pieces, which is a real sophistication and yet a sense of joy and playfulness, if that's not going a step too far, without sacrificing the sophistication at all. And I wonder if how does joy kind of infiltrate your work as an artist?
Joy, like the whole goal is happiness. It's not to be, we all do what we do on this, we all do in our homes, in our musical choices, in our gardens and the whole thing. The goal is to be happy. It's not to make a statement. It's not to impress your friends. It is to be happy. What environment can I create that makes me the most happy? And that's what both my parents really preached from an early day. Within my own medium, for instance, jewelry, I don't really look at it as something that I look at that jewelry and it's always music, because it is immediate. Like you listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan and like the guy's an open channel. Many other people, I'm leaving a lot of people out with that. But Thomas lives in New Orleans, I went to New Orleans, and jazz music, which is, it's the only American art form, ultimately. Teaches you a lot. And when you look at a piece of jewelry generally, it is one big voice. It's Pavarotti on the stage. It's green with white around it. It's blue with white around it. It's white with white around it. And I didn't want that because I like the conversation between colors, as I mentioned earlier. And jazz music is very different than that big singular voice. It's the trombone talking to the trumpet, which is talking to the drum, which is talking to the singer. And there's a fabulous jazz club called Snug Harbor in New Orleans, and I go there 5 nights a week. And I just listen to these people talk, and they ultimately became voices. When Billie Holiday played with Lester Young, man, that was a different language than when she played with somebody else. And when I put multiple colors together, ultimately I'm trying to create a conversation between the colors in there, and travel somewhere because of it. If I can relate it to a place that I've been and I enjoyed, I'll try to do it. But sometimes you're missing. Like, these are natural pearls. And by the way, every single animal that lives in the water that has a shell can produce a pearl. It's not just South Sea pearl. It's a conch. It's a quahog. And we were chatting about it earlier, quahog, which is clam chowder. It's the cherry stone on the little neck. It's all the same animal. Was the original American currency. It was the wampum. It was the shell of the quahog. So I wanted to incorporate, like a lot of that American, in the earrings on the left, that American concept of, because some of these are, the purple ones are the quahogs, of the jazz music with the different coloration speaking to one another, and our native waters. It turns me on, for lack of a better explanation. Like, it makes me happy. I don't really.
They look like they're dancing.
If an artist is trying to fulfill the expectations of the other person, they're going to do their worst work, guaranteed. If you're making something to fulfill your own expectations, man, is that fun. Yeah. Like, if you hit it, if you miss it, go back to the drawing board. But that's the goal. And also, like, when you're designing on any level, wherever it is, like, if you're comfortable in the area that you're sort of making decisions about, you're in the wrong area. You've got to go off into the water where you can't touch the bottom, and it's a little bit scary. And you've got to work from that standpoint, because you'll find something. It's all like searching for something. I love to use agate in these pieces because I don't know what it's going to look like at the end. When you carve into the agate and you get smaller, it changes. So there's a surprise for me at the end of every single piece that I can't anticipate. And it's that surprise, I mean, that's sort of what we're all looking for, that spark, you know?
I wonder, I feel like you could say that about designing a textile, a garden, or a room, that you can go in with a certain vision, but there's always some sort of unexpected result.
Light will play a major, like an accidental light. You didn't know the window was over there and it did this on the wall. That's the exciting part, the things you can't anticipate.
I'm going to pause here and quickly mention that this is my promo moment. That if you go to veranda.com/events, you can subscribe for a discount with the code event. In the meantime, if we have time for just a few audience questions, we have gone over, but our panelists have so much fabulous inspiration to discuss. Anyone? If not, I'll ask one parting question from each of our panelists. What is the best advice you would give someone embarking on a design project today? India, you can start.
My father once wrote, do you remember autograph books, before selfies, autograph books? And I had an autograph book aged about 7, and my father was the only famous person I knew at the time. So I asked him to write in it, in his very flamboyant signature, and he wrote, "Good taste in design are by no means dependent upon money." I didn't have a clue what it meant back then, but now I think about that quite a lot. Good taste in design are by no means dependent upon money.
That's great advice. Wambui?
I would say if anybody can locate, especially for a garden, if anybody can locate themselves in your garden, if a man from India and a man and a woman from Nantucket and a girl from Kenya can come to your production and feel at home, then you've succeeded.
Oh, wow. Thomas?
I have 2 things. One is, don't be afraid to ask for advice, for professional advice. It's not a point of honor. If we all sometimes, we're in this time and generation, we're being told we all have to do it by ourselves, and that if there's some sort of deficiency if you can't do it yourself, and to a certain point we can, but it's that transcendency that sometimes helps when working with professional colleague. And also, I feel like every space needs a work of art, and allow yourself to have that work of art sometimes before you begin the project or as you finish it, because I learned it Parish Hadley, and then later you can't have a great room without a work of art.
Sometimes it can inspire the whole space.
And it can be something you buy on vacation, or something your children made, or something you buy from a gallery. But it's one of those things that I've found essential over years.
Nicholas?
Just find your own voice. I mean, the discovery of your own voice is the most exciting thing you can possibly do. And then you just can do it over and over and over and over again. It's easy. You know what turns you on.
Yeah.
And if you find it, man, finding it, even the trip of finding it, is so much fun.
Thank you, panelists, so much, and thank you all for enjoying our discussion today.